And tonight on the Daily Wrap, revelations today that the man who was shot and killed by Boston police Tuesday was plotting with another suspect to behead an officer after being inspired by ISIS online. Is viral terrorism now the biggest challenge in the war on terror? The Freedom Act now signed into law. Are we more or less safe? Iran follows in Pamela Geller's footsteps and holds an anti-ISIS cartoon contest. And Hillary Clinton has big trouble filling seats at a ritzy all-women's event in Manhattan. We discuss all of that, plus potluck and yay and nay. This is the Daily Wrap, live from New York City. And welcome, everybody. I'm Joe Concha, along with my co-host. He is a SiriusXM radio host and senior political columnist for Forbes, Rick Unger.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening to you. And to his right, power attorney and America's pundit. She is Heather Hansen. Welcome.
Good to be here.
And finally, assistant online editor for Commentary Magazine, Noah Rothman is back once again. Good to see you.
Thanks for having
me. Good to see you. All right, it's time for the Daily Download. And we have new details this evening on the fatal law enforcement shooting of a knife-wielding terrorist suspect in Boston. The FBI says they moved in on 26-year-old Usama Rahim because he had talked about an imminent attack on police, as well as beheadings. He also purchased knives online via Amazon. Rahim is accused of plotting with 24-year-old David Wright, not the Mets infielder, for at least a week to attack police. Investigators say Rahim became radicalized by ISIS propaganda on social media, and that was the focus of a Homeland Security Committee hearing today on Capitol Hill.
Social media networks have become an extension of the Islamist terror battlefield overseas, turning homegrown extremists into sleeper operatives and attackers.
Now, a top FBI official told the panel that law enforcement is on heightened alert when it comes to this new threat.
The targets that are out there, the counterterrorism subjects, we are monitoring them very closely for any type of action, any type of overt steps, any mobilization factors. And when we see those, we're not taking the chance.
Now, authorities say a task force of Boston police and FBI agents confronted Rahim on a sidewalk and shot him dead when he refused to drop his knife. Rahim's brother claims the suspect was shot in the back, but a civil rights leader in Boston says he can vouch for the police version of events after seeing a video provided by authorities. Nevertheless, a Boston Muslim leader says it's not clear from the video whether police had to use deadly force. More from Heather Hansen on that in a moment. Rahim had been under 24-hour surveillance, and speaking of surveillance, the National Security Agency had 6 months to comply with the USA Freedom Act, which had signed into law, signed into law last night by President Obama. The NSA will no longer be allowed to collect bulk phone data. That information will now be in the hands of phone companies. The NSA will need a special court order to review the records. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell calls this a victory for the terrorists. Is he overstating things, Mr. Unger?
Which are we talking about? The first story in Boston or the second story?
Let's talk about the second first, and we'll backtrack.
Well, you know, my take on this whole new law that was signed into law last night is it's in a lot of ways insufficient. There's one thing that I really would have liked to have seen. I have always been troubled that the FISA court, which is where you go to get permission on this stuff, has never been, only the government is represented. Nobody from the other side is represented. And that to me is antithetical to everything in our system. And I really hoped
but it's changed.
That it wasn't changed in changed in the law?
It's interesting.
Never mind.
It's interesting because it's section 402 or 401 that it does allow for amicus. So there's going to be 5 private people who are trained in civil liberties and technology who are supposed to be arguing for privacy in front of the court.
But okay, well that I didn't know that. But they still aren't representing. In other words, in the case where somebody's going to be a victim of
individuals.
They're not representing the individual, and that strikes me as wrong.
I agree. And the thing about these amicus people, the court decides when they get brought in, so they have so much discretion. Yeah. You know, the other thing that's big about this, and I agree with you, I don't think it goes far enough. The other thing that's big about the Freedom Act is it allows for publication of a lot of these decisions, which is great. but they get to decide which decisions get published. So while it is a step in the right direction, and it's definitely something that is needed, there's a lot of things that are, remain to be seen.
Yeah,
as to
I mean,
whether it goes as far as it should.
I kind of feel like they took the obvious and didn't really do much by saying, okay, the phone companies will now keep all the metadata because it's going to be really hard to get that information from the phone companies like it never was before, and they skipped some of the really important things.
Noah, do you think this was a victory for Rand Paul?
Well, insofar as it was a victory for him because he needed to unite the Ron Paul supporters who were ebbing in their support for Rand Paul because he wasn't a perfect facsimile of their rather conspiratorial and paranoid father. But I find it actually a little remarkable that you say that, you asked in the opening, what story are we referring to? Are we referring to the NSA story? Are we referring to the Boston story? It's absolutely the exact same story. But what we're talking about here is precisely what we've been trying to intercept, which are information related to terrorist plots. Now, what we have here is a court filing. They got a warrant on this individual.
Yes,
but what we understand is that information had to come from somewhere. We're not talking about intercepting calls. We're not talking about intercepting individual conversations. We're talking about intercepting contacts, pings between individuals.
Let me tell you why I said that, because what I really wanted to do was compliment the Boston police. Which is why I was trying to get to the first part of the story, because I thought they did an awesome job today. Somebody, the brother of this guy, basically tried to sell this nonsense about him being shot in the back. Wasn't true, and instead of getting, the way police departments sometimes can, Boston police stood up and said, look, we have it on video, but we're going to show it first to the family of this guy, and then we're going to show it to religious leaders, and then we'll make it public. And I just thought, brilliant.
But how did they get that intelligence is the question.
What, the video?
No. In other words, how did Boston police, which of course we all agree they did a great job,
think we really know yet.
How'd they get ahead of this is the question.
Do you know how they got it?
No, I certainly don't. Neither do you.
Well, then I would probably continue and say the two stories are not related until you can say that they got it by metadata through phone calls.
Until you can prove that this is not related, then we're both talking in circles around each
That's
other.
an interesting
This is what's
approach.
happening is that we're hamstringing police in the pursuit of their job of keeping Americans and themselves safe, and we're creating these barriers by which they can't do their job unless they talk to the civil rights leaders.
So wait, are the FBI planes involved?
Are
the FBI planes involved? Because I can't prove that they aren't.
That we're creating these conditions whereby the police can't do their jobs unless they go through 5 or 6 different hoops, and only then do we graciously bestow upon them their due thanks for keeping us safe. This is an absolute travesty for Rand Paul and people like him, because just hours ago they were arguing that all of this is unnecessary, and now we have a dead individual on the streets who planned on beheading a police officer.
But I do want to know, are the FBI planes involved in this?
The FBI planes, I have no idea what the FBI planes are doing.
Neither do I, but the logic of your argument was,
but you're also shifting topics to a place
no,
that's
I'm
a little
not,
more
because
friendly.
you just told me that if I can't prove it, we have to assume it's true. Well, I don't think the FBI planes were involved, but you know what? I can't prove it. So it must be true by your logic.
I can't understand why
It's
we're
exactly
moving
what you
goalposts
just
unless
said.
you're conceding my point.
But gentlemen,
No,
the thing is,
that's what you said.
There are so many different aspects of the way that the surveillance went on. It may well have been from metadata. It may well have been through a warrant, and it may well have been just day-to-day 24-hour surveillance of him, which, as long as he was out in public with no reasonable expectation of privacy, is allowed. His co-conspirator is going to be charged, so we will learn a whole lot more about the evidence against him in the course of his trial, and then we'll be able to parse this out.
And by the way, for the record, I'm not against collecting the metadata, so I'm not quite sure why you threw that at me. I'm all for it. I think Rand Paul's out of his mind. But that doesn't mean that you take every incident. Well, we are. That's what was so bizarre about your comment. Doesn't mean you take every incident and join them together. They don't go together.
No, I think Heather's point is far more accurate here. That we don't really know what happened, and more likely this individual wasn't a really brilliant conspirator. No. He was probably intercepted being in public.
Could it have been as simple as just two guys that were trading some pretty salacious tweets, and then suddenly someone picked up on it and said, this guy's talking about how great ISIS is and how he'd really liked it. Maybe he was just that stupid to say something online.
Electronic communications that was intercepted by a program like PRISM.
Right.
Yeah, well, but it's not the metadata that's covered
under the law.
That assumes that they're keeping it private. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's on Facebook and Twitter is accessible to all of us. Right. But that's where, to go back to some of the scenes that we saw earlier from some of the House security stuff today, that it's actually social media that is the start of all this.
Exactly. So, anyway, good discussion, everybody. Coming up next, Republicans are threatening to cut the State Department's budget as punishment for holding back information on Benghazi. Is this a good idea? Keep it right there. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. I'm Joe Concha along with co-host Rick Unger, Heather Hansen, and Noah Rothman. They are here.
Nobody wanted to say, hey, there we are.
Republicans are raising the stakes in their attempt to get Hillary Clinton's State Department emails and other documents related to the 2012 Benghazi attack. How? Well, they're threatening to slash 15% off the State Department's operational fund until all document requests are satisfied. In a statement, Benghazi Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy says, and we quote, "The committee has been patient, but that patience is worn thin after months and in some instances years of non-compliance. In the interest of transparency for the American people and congressional oversight, state must improve its public record compliance. That is why the next step is being contemplated." Just yesterday, Gowdy grilled a State Department official on the process of releasing Mrs. Clinton's emails.
Do you know what mechanism she would have gone through to determine herself what was public record and what was private, or what may have been a mixed use? Do you know who made that initial determination for the former secretary?
She has told us that she erred on the side of inclusion.
So, should we take Hillary Clinton's word for it that she erred on the side of inclusion when it comes to her emails, Mr. Rothman?
I'm going to surprise you and say no.
Shocking.
Yeah,
Shocked.
Really cutting against type here. Good for the House. The House Permanent Select Committee, when they released their report, was very favorable to the CIA and very unfavorable to Secretary of State Clinton's State Department, particularly on the issue of Benghazi and putting security where it needed to be. If they do cut funding, State Department will howl and cry that they have been robbed of all the necessary tools they need to keep Americans safe abroad. They didn't do that when they had the appropriate funding. They need to really force this issue, and good for them.
I'm not going to ask you, could this backfire on Republicans? I will set it up for you nice and easy. How will this backfire on Republicans?
Well, first of all, I don't think it'll be the people who will be howling and crying if you shut down the State Department. I'll show you. Will be the American people. We have a State Department for a reason, actually. You may not like the last person who ran it, you may like the next one, but we have a State Department for a reason. But can I get to the real point here?
Sure.
All we talk about when we talk about the Benghazi Committee is Hillary Clinton. Can any of you tell me the last time any of them even talked about Benghazi? No, you can't. And the reason that you can't is because this committee has nothing to do with Benghazi. This committee is all about what can we do to bug Hillary Clinton and make her look bad.
So it's a political witch hunt in your mind.
It's completely that, because they don't talk about Benghazi. Guess what? There's information on Benghazi that's not only at the State Department. Why aren't they talking about that?
But here's the thing, Rick. I disagree with you that the point is Benghazi. I think the point is the failure of this administration to be transparent.
It's the Benghazi Committee.
No, it's not. But they're talking about any Freedom of Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act and their D+ or something rating and getting information out. No, it is the fact that they've been holding hearings all week on the Freedom of Information Act, and the fact that every single part, if you read the Wall Street Journal today, one of the op-eds, talking about the lack of transparency and the fact that this administration refuses to hand over anything, whether it be Benghazi, whether it be the IRS as well.
Can I ask a question? What's the name of this committee?
This particular committee, sure.
Rick, the only reason why we know about these emails in the first place is because of the Benghazi Committee.
Great.
If you're interested in transparency and government, and good government,
and I say go after it.
Then you should be thanking the Benghazi Committee for exposing it.
But would they do me a favor then? Would they investigate Benghazi, which is what they were formed to do? We have this little thing called the House Oversight Committee to take care of those problems. And if they want to put it in there and do this...
I'm sure you'd be praising former Chairman Darrell
Well, no, because he was even worse. But all I'm saying is, while you're busy trying to get Hillary, go do your thing, knock yourself out. Can you at least mention Benghazi since you're the Benghazi Select Committee?
The point of today's discussion is the fact that they are trying to use the power of the purse to ensure that there is some transparency here. And I just have to make a point because it's something that we said and hasn't been clear. When we talk about the fact that they're not going to have the money that they need, they have guaranteed that President Obama will get all of the money that he needs for the safety of our embassies. Where this money is going to be coming from is voluntary contributions to places like the UN. So there's not going to be a safety issue, and that needs to be quite clear.
I think they should absolutely do it.
The 15% takeaway is going to maybe force them to actually do what they're supposed to do.
They should do it. And by the way, what's the name of the committee?
Benghazi.
Okay. Moving on from one government entity to another, the agency that granted tax-exempt status to the multi-billion-dollar Church of Scientology has now granted it to the First Church of Cannabis in Indianapolis. Rick would be a member, but he would be Jewish. Anyway, and not only...
I can be converted.
That's true, you can be converted. And not only were they granted tax-exempt status, but it was approved in less than 30 days. Try getting your tax refund that quickly. By the way, pot is illegal in Indiana, which could pose a little bit of a challenge to the more than 600 members of the church who believe consuming marijuana on a daily basis is a sacrament. Cue Rick. Is this religious tax-exempt status thing becoming a joke, Miss Hanson?
It is absolutely becoming a joke. And this whole situation is like a law school question for an exam, because it involves so many things. It involves the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that was just signed into law by Governor Pence last Thursday, and whether or not the fact that they're doing something that is illegal, can they be arrested for it if they say, I'm doing it because it's my religion? So there's a whole lot of stuff there. The fact that now the IRS granted them tax-exempt status in 30 days is another problem. It's just rife with discussion.
15 seconds.
I'm going to show a little love to my friends in the Tea Party. If they're angry today, I don't blame them one bit. You know what? Under a good situation, it takes a year to a year and a half to get a 501c3 through. Never mind what was done to the Tea Party groups applying. And this, they get through in 30 days?
No, last
what
word.
In the world?
I can't agree with Rick on more. We
Wow.
have a little bit of unity. But yeah, I think that it would be a little bit troubling if we were to go after tax-exempt status for churches, particularly because it's a constitutional issue for a reason. You don't want to harass somebody for their legitimate beliefs, but I think if we have to start discussing what legitimate beliefs really are.
This has been around for goodness, at least 3 weeks.
Right, exactly.
Well, this proves once again that pot helps people get along for whatever reason. Anyway, should the U.S. leave forces in the Middle East forever? We tell you about that next. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Wrap. 2016 presidential hopeful Lindsey Graham has been a tough sell to a war-weary American public. He says the U.S. should never give up its presence in the Middle East.
I think you have to be involved in the Mideast militarily, politically, economically. If you're not, you're making a huge mistake. If we'd left Germany and Japan after a certain period of time, only God knows what would have happened. Here's what I'm telling the American people. It's not the day we leave that matters, it's what we leave behind. I don't see this ending in my lifetime.
Now, that approach is the polar opposite of 2016 rival Rand Paul, who's pushed for a more isolationist policy. So, how's this going to play with the American public? Is Lindsey Graham right? Does it make sense to have a U.S. presence in the Middle East permanently like we do in Germany and Japan, Mr. Unger?
You know, things that Lindsey Graham says that I often disagree with. This is not a crazy thing to say. There are some distinctions, however, that I think you have to acknowledge. Where we've left big troop collections, like in South Korea
parallel, right?
Or in Europe, they're in friendly countries. None of these countries where we would leave troops behind are particularly friendly towards us.
Kuwait, perhaps?
Kuwait, perhaps. I mean, you could probably find places to station them.
How about Iraq?
Right.
But
Right,
Iraq
it could have
is
been
not.
friendly.
Do you really?
Iraq,
Do you really?
an elected government.
Do you really perceive Iraq as a friendly country?
In 2010, when we left Iraq with an elected government supervised by the United Nations that was pro-Western by necessity, it was absolutely a friendly government, and we could have negotiated a SOFA.
I agree with you. We could have, and I don't have an allergic reaction to your argument. I really don't. But look at this over time. It's just not the same situation as the South Korea, where we could actually expect to leave troops in Iraq for 50 years.
Well, I think it really doesn't matter, honestly. I'm sorry. Real quick, just to make a quick point. If we wanted to leave a troop presence, we hold all the cards. We had a very unfriendly government in Afghanistan, and we nevertheless negotiated a 10,000 plus troop presence that is still there and will remain there, despite the fact that they're drawing it down. It is going to remain there indefinitely. Post 1991, we had troops in the region in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. We were exercising no-fly zones over Iraq, so we had troop presence in the region for a significant amount of time prior to the Iraq War. This is really a status quo to have American troops in the region, and what we have now is not.
But you're right. I'm sorry, but you're right. But the difference that I see is whenever we do have troops in Saudi Arabia is a great example. Yeah, they're theoretically a friendly government, but they get very fidgety when we have troops there because they don't really want us there. So can we push it? Yes, we can. You're right. We have the cards to do that. but it doesn't always have a happy ending when you have to push it. In these other countries, they wanted us.
Is this a happy ending, having removed people?
No, it's not a happy ending either way. I'm pointing out that it's not as simple as Lindsey is suggesting it is.
You know what I think is so interesting about what he's saying is he's saying what so many people won't say, and perhaps that's his role in this election.
Maybe.
You know, he's going to start pushing the envelope.
He's got nothing to lose.
Things. Well, right, but I think that it's a very good point. I think it's a point that a lot of people are afraid to say because a lot of people don't want to hear it. But for those families who have left their loved ones' blood behind in these areas of the Middle East, they may well say, yeah, it's great to leave some troops there.
Well, we'll have to move on from that discussion, but talk about somebody who is involved in the Iraq war decisions. Both people actually have been involved with the Iraq war since 2003. So let's get to it. For the first time in more than a decade, Americans now have a favorable view of former President George W. Bush, and he's even doing better than our current president. Take a look at this. This is CNN ORC. George W. Bush, favorable 57%, unfavorable 43%. Barack Obama, 49 and 49. So, what do you make of these numbers? Does time heal all wounds, Mr. Unger?
Absolutely. I make nothing of it. It's not at all surprising. The only surprise would be if you were surprised. Look, I always love to talk about Harry Truman, who left office with the lowest popularity numbers in the history of the American presidency.
Why was that?
Why was that?
Korean War?
It was the Korean. It was a number of things. Korean War was among them. You look at all of the lists today, be they among the general population or even among the scholars, he's always in the top 10 lists.
It's because Truman was such a good book.
Well, maybe that's why. But this is par for the course. Hillary Clinton, by the way, when she left the White House, she was not a popular person. And what everybody forgets with everything going on now, for the past 8 years, she was the most admired woman in America.
So when Bill left the White House in 2000, he was
Well,
upper
he was
60s,
still pretty
right?
high. Yeah, he was high.
Yeah,
but she was lower than he was because you always see a first lady
she
above.
was definitely lower. They didn't like Hillary Clinton, if you recall.
That's interesting. Yeah. So is this just a matter of most ex-presidents usually poll well when they're gone for a couple of years because there's nostalgia, and George W. Bush has carried himself exceedingly well and not
exceedingly well.
criticizing the president. That's probably led to these things.
And we remember he's a nice guy.
Well, and not only that, but I think the national security focus that we have going on right now, a lot of people are looking back at what happened in Iraq in 9/11 in a different way, and that may add to it a little bit. But I think for the most part, Rick's right that it's mainly because it's nostalgia.
Noah, last word?
This might actually be an outlier poll. There is not really a lot of data that back this up, but it isn't surprising, and it's shocking how the left reacted to this news. Very bitter, very upset. I think there's a lot of old wounds that have not yet been healed.
As somebody on the leftish side, I'm not bitter about it at all. I think people, when we were very unhappy with Bush as a president, we forgot what a nice man he is. And
he was always likable. You could
very
disagree with
nice
his
man.
policies, but no one ever said, boy, he's a mean person, whatever. Anyway, Marie Harf goes to war with the New York Times. You have to stick around for this. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. The Draw Muhammad contests here in the U.S. have sparked lots of controversy. And now in Iran, they're holding a Draw ISIS contest. We're not kidding. Cartoonists from around the world are in Tehran to take part in the anti-ISIS event. More than 1,000 drawings from around the world are now competing in said contest. It should be pointed out that Iran has also hosted a cartoon contest that questioned the Holocaust. So, before I get to my question, by the way, I want to bring up to everybody at home, the man that was shot and killed by Boston police, CNN now reporting that law enforcement officials are saying that he also was plotting to assassinate Pamela Geller, who ties in perfectly to this discussion right now, considering the contest that she's held here. Is this a positive sign that Iran is holding contests like this?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
If you saw any, first of all, if you saw any of those cartoons, they were as anti-Semitic as anything else. They had their ISIS. There's one cartoon where they were holding little ISIS babies, and they had Stars of David dangling from their ears and Stars of David around because ISIS is a Israeli creation.
But if they're willing to fight ISIS with us,
and an American Israeli creation, that's the myth in Tehran. But Iran is positioning itself like it positions itself against any Sunni element in the region, be it a state or be it an insurgency. It is engaged in a regional war against the Sunni elements, which is ISIS, which is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is just about every other, Egypt, every other entity that is sort of pro-American or anti-American in this case. It really has very little to do with America, and Israel for that matter. It's a very regional dynamic.
So Heather, it's a matter of the enemy of my enemy is my enemy.
Well, absolutely, and it's not even close to anything like free speech. In fact, today they sentenced a young woman to 12 years in jail because she drew pictures of members of the parliament with heads of monkeys and sheep or something. So it's only if you are drawing what they like that everything is fine, but anything that even treads upon anything that they find questionable, and you go to jail.
Interesting.
What they both said is exactly right.
Well, we move on. State Department spokesman Marie Harf, a friend of the show, is taking aim at the New York Times and got into a Twitter war with one of its reporters. Harf is disputing if a Times report that says Iran's stockpile of nuclear fuel increased by 20% since last year and is complicating, nuclear negotiations.
The notion that this is some big issue of concern in negotiation is more, I think, of manufacturing a controversy than actual reality. Everyone who read that story this morning was totally perplexed by it.
Of course, Harf, being a senior member of the State Department, then took to Twitter to try to rebut the Times article point by point, which is easy to do in 140 characters and stuff. And then she got into it with another media outlet which took issue with her defense. Is this a valuable exercise for a State Department official to get into a tit-for-tat with reporters, Heather Hansen?
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Twitter is not meant for these types of debates. These are important issues. They're things that we need to talk about, but not via Twitter for sure. And to be fair, the New York Times Sanger, the New York Times writer should not have been involved in it either.
That's true. Before I get to your answers for a moment, we should also note to everybody at home that even though Marie Harf did get a promotion recently, she still is keeping, we will reiterate, her prior job, okay, as Rush chairman, and it should be noted that the all-white party is still on for 4th of July weekend. In fact, we have a picture of Marie with her sisters. There she is, and looking good, right in the front, of course, because she probably is the most prominent member of Alpha Phi, I believe she's in, or is it Alpha? Yeah, it's Alpha Phi. So good for Marie, and so she's really juggling a couple things at once, and perhaps the stress has been overwhelming, and that's why, Noah, she's going after the New York Times in the way she is.
I can't imagine that's probably true. I really, and this is the individual who is responsible for handling quite a bit of the negotiations with Iran. I wonder why we would expect Iran to comply with its terms of the agreement when we bend over backwards in order to apologize for them when they violate those terms.
Did you really just say that she's being serious, that she's handling quite a bit of the negotiations?
Her role as communications professional of the State Department is to handle all responsible communications
but
related
not
duties,
handle the negotiations.
Responsible for not negotiations.
I just wanted
responsible
to clarify
for
that.
the Iran negotiations.
Right.
So her primary role is to communicate to the press where we are diplomatically with negotiations with Iran. And by doing so, she's taking Tehran's position more often than not.
Well, I don't know about that, but to answer your question, yes, it is her job to go tit for tat with reporters. I would agree with you.
Though?
No, that's what I was just going to say.
Sorry about that.
I would agree with you. Twitter is not the best place to do it. But yeah, that is her job, to stand up for their data and their information. I mean, I got to tell you, she succeeded in at least, I would have bought the New York Times story, but she at least made me stop and think, well, maybe they got it wrong, and now I want to go look into it a little more deeply to decide for myself.
I just find it amazing. We all have Twitter accounts here. That it is literally impossible to win a debate in any capacity in 140 characters.
You're right.
Because then you're shortening words and you're saying 1 of 5 and you got to continue your thought. Just say, hey, what's your email? Got a problem with, but I think it's being done publicly by people like Harf because they want to show they're doing their job, right?
Or somehow make a point on Twitter, which is ridiculous. It's not as if she's trying to have a private conversation. It's absolutely inane.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay, nice use of a name. Well, coming up next, it's potluck time. Rick and I will share our favorite stories of the day. Rick, a quick preview?
You know, I don't remember what I'm talking about. So.
Very good. This is the Daily Wrap. Please don't go anywhere.
Oh, that's right.
And welcome back to Daily Wrap. It's potluck time, part of the show. We go around the table, share our favorite stories of the day. We can't really decide who goes first, so I will flip for it. Heads, I go first. Tails, you go last. Tails, Rick goes last. You get the quarter. All right, very good. It's not real anyway. All right, so what am I talking about? Media, of course, my first love. And you may notice some headlines if you go to the Google machine after the show and not during, and put in Bernie Sanders surge, Bernie Sanders win, Bernie Sanders momentum, and you're going to find a lot of very favorable headlines for Mr. Sanders. It doesn't matter, conservative, liberal kind of outlet. Let's look at some headlines. When I just did this an hour and a half before the show, I simply put in Bernie Sanders, Hillary, and here are the first 4 things that came up. Do we have the headlines, control room? We do. The Bernie Sanders surge. That's from The Hill. That's a conservative publication, of course. Let's go to our next one, and that is, who could resist Bernie Sanders' strange allure? And they use Sanders with the apostrophe right. People are afraid to put apostrophe SS, but that is correct. And that was Tamansky, I believe. Yeah, it was. Okay, LA Times, what do they have to say? Why can't Bernie Sanders win? Yes. And finally, Vox, Ezra Klein's outfit. Looks a little like Noah, actually, Ezra, now that I think about it with glasses. The real reason Bernie Sanders is a threat to Hillary Clinton. That's for real deep thinkers over there at Fox. Or, excuse me, Vox, it rhymes. So, is the media, the question is, rooting for Bernie Sanders? And the answer is, people, of course they are. Who wants to watch Hillary Clinton just coast to the nomination, which, by the way, isn't for another year until they actually hold the convention, actually even more than a year. So we want to see a fight. And Bernie, quite frankly, has been on every network, every media outlet, making his case. You may disagree with a lot of it, but at least he's in front of a camera, unlike the person that he's challenging, and he's making arguments that are making people think a little bit. So I'll ask the panel now, open it up a little bit. Is the media rooting for Bernie Sanders to at least make this a horse race?
Well, they are at this point, yes, because it's going to help sell newspapers and TV shows, etc. It's ridiculous. You know, we're supposed to comment on what happens in these things, not try and create more exciting races. It's kind of silly, but yeah, it's exactly what's happening.
He's polling at 16% in Iowa right now, and Hillary's only, and I say only 57%, but that's pretty interesting considering that her competition basically is a 73-year-old pot-smoking socialist.
Right. I mean, there are some people who are saying she's going to have a fight for the nomination. I don't know who it's going to be against.
Yes.
Just today, but it's going to be, you know, I think that with, as far as Bernie Sanders is concerned, I think that the media just wants more ideas. They don't necessarily want Sanders, they want more ideas. They want people
and they're out there. And Noah, before I get to you, you said that some people are saying that it could be a real fight. What kind of people?
Yeah,
well, let's hear from Paul Begala.
Just to be clear, you don't think that any of this has to do with the questions surrounding the Clinton Foundation funding or her lack of answers to the press, not wanting to talk to them for a month? You don't see any connection?
I don't see any connection with stiffing the press. Sorry, I don't mean to be mean, but there's anything voters hate more than politicians, it's the press.
Sure, but we are their conduit, so that if we're asking questions, she's answering them to the public.
It is much less that than just the mere fact that she's a politician she's running around. This is a 50-50. I have said this from the beginning. It's going to be a very, very tough race. She's going to have a real challenge for her party's nomination, although that doesn't show in the polls yet. It will, and when it does, let's not get our panties in a wad. Let's say, hey, Begala told us this was coming months ago. It's a tough country. It's a tough race. It's going to be very close.
Okay, Noah.
What in the world did he say?
He said it's a 50-50 proposition. The audio went out for a second, whether she will get the nomination or not. Is it 50-50?
No, it's something more like 80-20, but there is going to be a primary. There always was one, and I don't think this is a media creation. I think anybody who's to the left of Hillary Clinton was going to attract a fair amount of support from the far left of the progressive elements of the Democratic Party. It was going to be somebody, and why not a socialist?
Okay. Mr. Unger, you are up next. We will end it on that note.
Well, first, I feel before I jump into this, I should break the news that we've just received that Lincoln Chafee, who announced his candidacy for the Democratic nomination for president today, God only knows why, but apparently he's doing it on a platform of bringing the metric system to the United States. So everybody be aware of that, because this could become the big campaign issue.
Wow, we'll be calling it a Royale with cheese. Instead of a quarter pounder.
All right, but what I want to talk about is I want to propose a change in the debate. Right now, you know, we all have our ideological bends and we talk about big government versus small government. I want us to reframe this conversation. I want the conversation to become about competent versus incompetent government. Because yesterday we learned that the TSA brilliantly failed the test to see if they were protecting us as they're supposed to. Not very competent. Today we find out that the Pentagon has sent to 51 different laboratories around the country live anthrax, by the way, including to the Pentagon itself. Not exactly a paragon of competence. We know that EPA officials who were caught watching porn at work were promoted. Guys, I think we're out of time, so I'm not going to get too deeply into this, but let me just sum up by saying Let's talk about competence before we worry about size of government. It's not operating the way it should be.
Wow. So you can get promoted if you watch porn at work.
Apparently you can.
Okay, very good.
Does that work here?
Yay or nay is next. Back with more in just a moment. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. Apparently it's not happy time, but it is time for yay or nay. First up, rather strange news coming from Capitol Hill as a sitting U.S. Senator now suggesting using RICO laws be applied to global warming skeptics. Yes. Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, and with a last name like that, why not run for president like everybody else, compared global warming skeptics to tobacco companies and cited a 2006 legal decision that found those companies to participating in racketeering. Should global warming skeptics be prosecuted, and will you represent them, Heather Hansen?
If they were prosecuted, I would represent them. They absolutely should not. It is ridiculous. Whenever we want to have these debates about important issues, it turns into just shut up, I don't want to listen to you, I have my own points. It's free speech, First Amendment, no, they should not be prosecuted.
You're surprised they're trying to shut down the debate as much as we hear, like, look, it's a done deal and to discuss it is ridiculous.
And I have to go back and hear what he said, because Sheldon Whitehouse is usually a bit more sensible than that. Obviously, if that's what the suggestion was, no, I don't agree with that.
Maybe a little hyperbole. No.
He's relatively far left on the issue of global warming. Yeah. Look, the left, or the Soviets rather, thought that they had perfect free speech. They just didn't allow you to lie. They had their own notion of what the truth was, and this is a variant of that.
I like how you worked in that left and Soviets, and that was good.
Well, I do it a lot, actually.
I'm not surprised.
Kind of my thing.
So, more trouble for 2016 hopeful Hillary Clinton. Apparently, the former Secretary of State had trouble filling seats at a private women's-only event in Midtown Manhattan on Monday. The event, called Conversation with Hillary Clinton, hosted by Silda Spitzer, wanted to bring in 135 powerful women at almost $27,000 per person, but when the deadline approached, only 50 tickets had been sold, so they opened the event up to us men. So aside from the fact that Clinton wasn't able to get 125 wealthy liberal women in Manhattan, because there's none of those around, to attend her event, are gender-only events a good idea, Heather Hansen?
Absolutely not. It's ridiculous on either side to cut out a whole gender or any number of people from any of your events, especially when you're trying to raise money.
Uh-oh.
I got to make a clarification. It wasn't 27,000. That would be grossly illegal. It was 2,700.
2,700.
Yeah, which is the max you can contribute. Still a lot of money, and still true that they couldn't sell out the tickets they wanted to.
Okay.
They did have to invite guys. I don't care if they have a all-women thing. I think the bigger story is she couldn't sell out the tickets.
It's not smart. I'm not saying they can't do it. It's just not the smartest.
Noah?
Yeah, I tend to agree with all that. I don't really have a big opinion on whether or not they should or shouldn't be doing that. But, it is a bit of an embarrassment.
Let's move on. Apparently the best way to avoid an Armageddon-level cyber attack is to barely have the internet in your country, like North Korea. When the United States tried to take down North Korea's nuclear weapons program about 5 years ago, we went about it the way most things are done these days, with a computer virus, like in the movie Independence Day, when we put it in a mothership and it eventually, well, anyway. But the communist nation barely has the internet in the first place. And what they do is have, well, more outdated and isolated kind of internet, like my Atari 2600. So, the attack was a complete failure. Should we all go back to using technology of the 70s for safety's sake? Yay or nay? This will be quick. Noah?
No, probably not. But we should be hardening things against electronic attack.
Absolutely.
Right.
So they pull off Sony, but then they don't even have an internet for us to attack. It's so unfair. Quickly.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's not worth going backwards.
Right.
Was that video from Call of Duty?
It was, as a matter of fact.
It was.
We couldn't get the real thing.
It was familiar looking.
So we went with Call of Duty. And finally, and possibly most importantly tonight, Tallywhackers is officially open for business. We told you about this new restaurant, dubbed the Male Hooters, back in May. Tallywhackers is, quote, for anyone who desires a fun atmosphere, amazing food, outstanding talent, those are Heather's words, and a little eye candy. Speaking of little eye candy, we have a latest staff photo here. Let's put that up real quick, guys. Look at that, boy. And look at the three guys in the middle. Rick, you look tremendous. And Noah, I didn't know you would apply, but you got to get to a gym a little bit more. I mean, look at our
Actually, Noah's looks real. That's the thing.
Ah, yes. Okay.
I got a nice tribal tattoo, too.
This is true.
I like her in Tijuana.
Yeah, and I loved your bracelet there, by the way. So anyway, we have to go because we have a shift to get to, the night shift. And Heather, of course, is a good tipper.
I'm a good customer.
Yeah, so we've heard. Anyway, thank you, panel. Great job tonight. This is called Ending on a Very Light Note. And thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Joe Concha. Newsmax Prime with J.D. Hayworth. That's next. Thanks for joining.